I'm Detective James, and this is the cases the news forgot. Before I tell you about what I found out there, I need to know something. Are you listening to this late at night? Maybe lying in bed while the shadows in the corner of your room seem just a bit too long? Or are you driving down some lonely stretch of highway, just you and the hum of the engine? Wherever you are, drop a comment and tell me. My name is Detective James. I've spent 30 years carrying a badge, but nothing in the academy prepares you for the high desert. If this is your first time hearing about the Navajo Nation and the things that go bump in the dark out here, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another cold case from my files. This is the story of Daniel Sosi and the price he paid for coming home. 6 weeks ago, Daniel made a choice that most of us in the city would call career suicide. He walked away from a comfortable air-conditioned life with the Phoenix PD to join the tribal police in Red Mesa, Arizona. The drive north is about 5 hours, and Daniel told me he stopped 3 times. Not for gas, and not for food. He was stalling. Every mile took him closer to a family he hadn't seen in 7 years, and closer to memories he had tried to bury under the asphalt of Phoenix. As he crossed into the reservation, the world changed. The strip malls and billboards vanished, replaced by red rock monuments that rose out of the earth like ancient, silent gods. The sky turned that shade of endless blue you only see in the high desert, beautiful but cold, like it's keeping secrets. The Red Mesa station was a low, modular building at a crossroads, looking like it had been dropped there by accident. Daniel pulled in 15 minutes early for his first shift and met Captain Sarah Benali. She was a woman carved out of desert stone, weathered, sharp, and suspicious. She looked at Daniel's record and asked the one question he dreaded. Why? Why leave the big city for a pay cut in the middle of nowhere? Daniel gave her the real answer, the one that tasted like copper in his mouth. My brother Thomas died here 2 months ago, he said. The report said he swerved to avoid an unknown animal. I want to know what that animal was. The room went cold for a second. Sarah knew Thomas. Everyone did. She led Daniel inside and pointed to a framed, yellowed document on the wall. It wasn't a list of city ordinances. It was the Red Mesa District Protocols. I've seen some strange things in my 30 years, but these rules, they were survival instructions for a world that doesn't follow the laws of physics. Rule 1, never investigate skinwalker reports alone after dark. Rule 2, if a suspect starts running on 4 legs, stop the pursuit and get back in your car. Rule 6, if someone whistles at night during a traffic stop, leave immediately. Daniel looked at those rules and thought it was a joke. He was a city cop. He believed in evidence, forensics, and logic. But Captain Benali leaned across her desk, and the look in her eyes told him he was playing a dangerous game. She handed him his brother's final incident report. Thomas had responded to a call at an abandoned hogan. He wrote that he saw a figure, something that looked human, but moved on its hands and feet like a beast, transitioning into a 4-legged run that no man could ever mimic. Thomas had come back from that call changed. He started checking his back seat before getting in. He kept salt and corn pollen in his cruiser. He died 2 weeks later, terrified, with tracks near his car that looked like coyote prints, but were far too large and far too deep. Daniel was partnered with a young officer named Marcus Yazzie. As they drove west into the desolate desert, Marcus told him the part of the story that wasn't in the official file. He was the one who found Thomas's truck wrapped around a juniper tree. He told Daniel that the skid marks showed a violent swerve to avoid something that wasn't there. But the worst part? Those oversized coyote tracks didn't just stay in the dirt. They led right up to the driver's side door. Something had stood there, inches from Thomas's window, watching him die. As Daniel sat in that patrol car, looking out at the vast, silent mesas, he realized he wasn't just there to investigate a crash. He was standing in the middle of a hunting ground. I've seen men break under less, but Daniel was determined. He didn't know yet that out here, The rules on the wall are the only thing standing between a badge and a grave. I've spent 30 years staring into the eyes of men who've done the unthinkable, but as a detective, I've always had a crime scene, a motive, and a suspect who bled just like anyone else. But out here, in the vast silence of the Navajo Nation, the logic I brought from the city is as useless as a flashlight with no batteries. Marcus, my young partner, looked at me as we drove past a cluster of sun-bleached houses. He told me that in Red Mesa, we don't have codes for what we really see. We call it animal activity or suspicious circumstances. Because if we wrote down the truth, no one in a suit in Phoenix would believe us. He pointed out an elderly woman named Mrs. Totine weaving on her loom. Last month, she'd had something scratching at her windows. Marcus found the tracks, human footprints that transitioned step by step into the heavy, rhythmic gait of a predator. He didn't tell her to install a security system, he told her to sprinkle corn pollen. Traditional protection for a traditional threat. Around noon, we stopped at a small trading post that smelled of dust and old cedar. The owner, Joe Bay, looked at me with eyes that seemed to see right through my badge. He told me I looked just like my brother Thomas. "Be careful," Joe said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "The first frost is coming, and they get hungry before winter." I wanted to ask who they were, but Marcus and Joe just traded a look that made my stomach knot. Out here, you don't ask too many questions until you're ready for the answers. Our first real call came in over the radio. A wellness check on a man named Lawrence Nez. He hadn't been seen in 3 days. As we drove deeper into the backcountry, where the Red Canyon walls began to lean over the road like spectators, Marcus grew quiet. He told me wellness checks can go sideways fast. Sometimes it's just isolation, but sometimes people disappear for reasons that aren't in the manual. When we pulled up to the Nez residence, the silence was absolute. There was a mobile home and a traditional hogan, but as we stepped out, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I looked at the hogan and remembered Rule 4. The doorway was facing north. In the city, a door is a door. But for the Navajo, a north-facing door is a deliberate violation of the sacred. It's a trap or a sign that something inside has twisted the world to its own liking. Marcus stopped dead, his hand hovering over his service weapon. He told me the logs hadn't just been built that way, they'd been rearranged recently. The earth was still damp where the heavy timbers had been dragged. Something had physically reconstructed that hogan from the inside out. We didn't go in. Marcus called for Haston Nez, a medicine man who looked to be 90 years old and wore the history of the desert in the wrinkles of his face. He told us that Rule 4 exists because back in the 80s, 3 officers walked into a north-facing hogan and simply ceased to exist. No blood, no struggle, just an empty room and the smell of rot. Haston Nez arrived in a rusted pickup and began to circle the hogan, his voice rising in a low, rhythmic chant as he sprinkled corn pollen to mark a boundary. He looked at me with ancient, knowing eyes and told me my badge gave me authority over human law, but that I had reached the edge of my jurisdiction. He told us Lawrence was gone, and that the hogan had to be burned to the ground to contain whatever was pacing in the shadows behind that north-facing door. As we drove away in the fading light, I kept watching my side mirror, waiting for something to emerge from that darkness. I asked Marcus if this happened often. "Often enough that we have rules for it," he said. "Welcome to the tribal police, Daniel. We don't just deal with criminals. We deal with everything." That night, lying in my small trailer in Red Mesa, the silence felt heavy, like it was pressing against the windows. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Your brother understood too late. Will you learn faster?" I felt the adrenaline spike through my chest. I called the number back, but there were no words on the other end, just the sound of heavy, wet breathing and a scraping noise, like bone on metal. Then came the howls. 3 coyotes, screaming from 3 different directions. But they weren't outside. They were coming from the speaker of my phone. I remembered Rule 5. Turn off your radio and remain silent for 10 minutes. I threw the phone across the room and sat there in the dark, counting my heartbeats. I'm Detective James, and I'm starting to realize that in the desert, the rules aren't just protocols. They're the only thing keeping the darkness from coming inside. I sat there in the pitch black of my trailer, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the silence that followed those phantom coyote calls. Outside, the real desert began to wake up. Actual coyotes started howling in a frantic, predatory response to the calls from my phone. The sound echoed across the mesas, lonely and sharp. And then, somewhere in that chaotic chorus, I heard it. A voice. It sounded just like my brother Thomas, calling my name from somewhere deep in the dark. I didn't tell Marcus about the phone. I didn't tell anyone. Part of me was desperate to believe I was just a grieving man losing his mind, but the detective in me knew exactly what I'd heard. And that terrified me more than the alternative. My second week on the res started with a deceptive quiet. Routine patrols, traffic stops, the kind of normal police work that almost makes you forget you're walking on haunted ground. Then came the call about the jewelry. It was a crisp October morning, the kind where the frost clings to the shadows long after the sun comes up. Dispatch sent us to Highway 191, mile marker 47, report of debris on the road. When we pulled up, the asphalt was glittering. Scattered across 20 yards of highway were hundreds of pieces of high-end Navajo jewelry. Turquoise and silver necklaces, heavy bracelets, concho belts. A literal fortune just lying in the dirt. I reached down to pick up a squash blossom necklace, but Marcus moved faster than I've ever seen him move. He grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. "Rule 3, Daniel," he hissed. "Jewelry on the roadway stays where it is. We mark it, and we call Hastien Nez." I looked at the silver glinting in the sun. "Marcus, there's tens of thousands of dollars here. We can't just leave it." "We aren't leaving it," he said, already reaching for his radio. "We're protecting ourselves from it." As we waited for the medicine man, Marcus pointed out the pattern. It wasn't random debris. The jewelry had been placed in a perfect circle, 30 feet across, with specific ceremonial pieces at the 4 cardinal directions. When Hastien Nez arrived, his face went as gray as the desert dust. He told us it was a summoning circle. Someone was using ancient forbidden knowledge to call something across from the in-between spaces. He recognized the silver work. It belonged to the Atsidi family, but the patriarch, Leonard Atsidi, had died 3 months ago, the exact time my brother started acting strange. We drove out to Leonard's abandoned ranch, a place that felt like it was being swallowed by neglect. The house had been ransacked. In Leonard's study, we found books on Navajo ceremonies with the pages torn out, and written on the wall in ash were twisted, inverted chants. Marcus's face went pale as he read them. "This isn't for healing," he whispered. "This is about transformation. This is about making a deal with something old." I found a photo album tucked behind a nightstand. In the back was a picture of Leonard standing with a younger man. The kid was wearing one of the turquoise bracelets we'd just found on the highway. Marcus identified him immediately. Curtis Gorman. He worked at the trading post in Red Mesa. A quiet kid, respectful. But Joe Bay told us Curtis had changed after Leonard died. He'd started asking questions about things that shouldn't be whispered, let alone studied. We raced to Curtis's trailer on the edge of the desert. His truck was there, but the air around the place felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a massive heart attack. The front door was ajar, swaying slowly in the breeze, creaking on its hinges. Marcus unstrapped his holster, and I did the same. We weren't just looking for a thief anymore. We were looking for a man who had opened a door that my brother had died trying to close. Through the gap in the door, I could see the flickering of dozens of candles. The air that drifted out of that trailer didn't smell like a home. It smelled like copper and old, wet earth. Marcus stepped up, his voice cracking like a whip. "Curtis Gorman, Navajo Nation Police, we need to talk." Nothing but that oppressive, heavy silence. I gave Marcus a nod, and we breached, weapons drawn, our flashlights cutting through the thick haze of incense and smoke. The interior was a nightmare. Candles were glued to every surface with their own wax. Corn pollen was laid out in intricate geometric patterns on the floor, and Leonard at City's stolen jewelry was arranged in a perfect, pulsating design. In the center of it all sat Curtis. He was cross-legged, chanting in a low, rhythmic Navajo dialect that I didn't recognize. "Curtis, stop!" Marcus shouted. "Whatever this is, it's over." Curtis's eyes snapped open. I've seen some things in 30 years on the force, but I've never seen eyes like those. They were pure, oily black, no iris, no white, just pits. When he spoke, it sounded like 3 people were using his throat at once. "Too late," the voices said. "The door's open. The old one is hungry." Marcus grabbed my arm, his voice a panicked whisper. "Daniel, look behind him." In the corner, where the candlelight should have hit the wall, a shadow was moving. It was tall, pale, with joints that bent the wrong way, and eyes that glowed with a predatory animal hunger. We backed out of that trailer as fast as our feet would move, never taking our eyes off Curtis. Outside, the trailer began to shake on its foundations. The candles inside went out all at once, and Curtis stepped into the moonlight. But he wasn't walking like a man. He was moving in jerky, inhuman hitches. "The old one wants what was taken," he said in that terrifying, layered voice. "Thomas paid part of the debt. Now it's your turn." My blood turned to ice. "What did you do to my brother?" I yelled, my finger tightening on the trigger. "The ceremony wasn't finished," Curtis hissed. "Leonard promised an offering but died too soon, so the old one took what it found on the road. A young man, alone, with a pure heart. He tasted like fear. I wanted to kill him right then, but Marcus held me back. Curtis tilted his head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. "The door stays open until the debt is paid, unless someone with At-City blood closes it." I stared at him. "I don't have At-City blood." "Your grandmother," Curtis laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "She was an At-City before she married. You carry the blood. You carry the connection. The old one knew Thomas, and now it knows you." Sirens started wailing in the distance, but Curtis was already changing, his body elongated, his skin turning the color of bone. He dropped to all fours and sprinted into the desert faster than any patrol car could follow. I remembered Rule 2. If they transition to 4 legs, stop the pursuit. We watched him vanish into the darkness. When Haston Nez arrived, he went into the trailer and came out looking like he'd seen the end of the world. He told me that because of my bloodline, I was now the target. The entity wasn't just haunting the road anymore, it was hunting me. Haston Nez looked me dead in the eye and gave me 2 choices. I could run, leave the reservation and never look back, because the thing couldn't follow me past the tribal borders, or I could stay. I could finish the ceremony Leonard started and close the door myself. But he warned me. Most people who try that don't come back. I stood there in the dust, the blue and red police lights flashing against the red rocks, and I realized my badge wasn't going to save me. This was about family, blood, and a debt that was older than the badge I wore. That night, Haston Nez took me to his home, a traditional hogan hidden deep in the backcountry, far from the reach of any paved road. Inside, the air smelled of cedar smoke and age. He began to show me the legacy Leonard At-City had left behind. There were books written by 1930s anthropologists who had foolishly recorded oral traditions that were never meant to be written down, notes on summoning rituals that predated the Navajo people, and diagrams of doorways to spaces that sit right next to our world but remain terrifyingly separate. Leonard had been chasing power, trying to become a medicine man of legend. But as Haston Nez told me, you cannot force power. It must be earned through a lifetime of service. Leonard took shortcuts, and those shortcuts had teeth. The entity he summoned is known as the Pale Watcher. It exists in the in-between spaces, between day and night, life and death. It grants power, but it demands a pound of flesh in return. Leonard died before he could pay the bill, so the Watcher began collecting on its own. Thomas was just the first payment. Haston Nez handed me a small bundle wrapped in red cloth, corn pollen, white shell, turquoise, and jet. "Keep these on you," he warned. "They won't stop the Watcher, but they might give you enough time to breathe." I looked at him and told him I wasn't running. "Then, you're learning," he replied. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was Officer Daniel Sosi, patrolling with Marcus, handling traffic stops and domestic calls. By night, I was a student of the shadows, memorizing chants in Navajo and practicing protection symbols in the sand. Haston Nez was a brutal teacher. He knew the Pale Watcher was circling closer. I started seeing it too. A pale figure at the edge of the woods during patrols, a shape keeping pace with my truck on the midnight highway. Once, I woke up to find handprints on my trailer window. They were too large, with too many fingers. Marcus saw the toll it was taking. He pulled the cruiser over one evening at a scenic overlook, the iconic silhouettes of Monument Valley stretching out before us, indifferent to our struggle. "You look like hell, Daniel," he said quietly. "Everyone knows you're training with the medicine man. Is it helping?" I told him it was like trying to learn a new language while a wolf was hunting you. Every night I studied, I felt the Watcher getting closer, testing my fear. Haston Nez believed the entity fed on that fear. If I ran, it won. If I stayed, I had one shot to close the door. "Your brother was my friend," Marcus said, staring at the sunset. "I won't fail you. Don't try to be a hero. That's what gets people killed out here." But there was one thing Haston Nez hadn't told Marcus. The final ceremony to banish the Pale Watcher required At-City blood. My blood. And the medicine man hadn't told me how much I would have to give. Everything came to a head on a bitter November night. The air was so cold, our breath vaporized the moment it hit the air. Around 9:00 p.m., a call came in. A break-in at the Red Mesa chapter house. Someone was destroying the sacred ceremonial items stored there. We arrived in 15 minutes, the building dark except for a single flickering light in the back storage room. The front door had been kicked off its hinges. We entered tactically, guns drawn, clearing the empty halls until we reached the back. Inside, the scene was a sacrilege. Kachina dolls were torn apart, medicine bundles were emptied, and ceremonial robes were shredded into rags. Curtis Gorman stood in the center of the wreckage, surrounded by a circle of debris. He was using a piece of broken glass to slice his own arms, letting the blood drip onto the sacred items. The multi-layered voice, the one that sounded like a choir from hell, began to chant. He wasn't just destroying things, he was feeding the doorway. I've spent my life following procedures, but as a detective, you learn that the most dangerous criminals are the ones who use your own rules against you. Marcus had his weapon drawn, commanding Curtis to drop the glass, but the man, if you could still call him that, just turned and smiled. His skin looked like gray parchment stretched over moving clockwork, and his teeth were a jagged mess of bone. He looked at me and said, "The old one was eager to taste my blood to settle the debt once and for all." "What happens when someone forces officers to violate their own rules?" Curtis asked, his voice a sickening harmony. Before I could blink, he bolted, not away from us, but straight through us. Marcus fired, the rounds hitting center mass, but Curtis didn't even flinch. He knocked Marcus aside like he was made of straw and ran out into the night on all fours. I didn't care about Rule 2. I didn't care about the protocols. I ran after him into the open desert, my flashlight beam dancing wildly against the red rock. He led me to the old mining complex, a skeletal ruin of rusted steel and open shafts that dropped straight into the throat of the earth. Curtis was waiting for me at the mouth of the deepest shaft. He stood upright again, mocking me, telling me how he'd lured Thomas to his death by making the steering wheel pull to the right while something pale stepped out of the dark. The rage was a physical weight in my chest. I wanted to end him, but then I saw it. 20 yards away, the pale watcher finally showed itself. It was 7 feet of bone-colored nightmare, its joints bent in ways that defied anatomy. And its face was a shifting, blurry mess of features that my brain refused to process. It spoke, and its voice was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, a melody that made me want to lay down my gun and just walk into its arms. "Come home, Daniel," it crooned. "Satisfy the debt." My hand actually started to reach out. I was under its spell, ready to give up, when Marcus tackled me from out of nowhere. Curtis shrieked and charged, and Marcus emptied his magazine into the dark. It didn't kill them, but it gave us enough of a window to scramble back. We were being herded, though. They weren't just chasing us. They were pushing us toward the ledge of a mine shaft with no railings. Suddenly, the ground beneath our boots simply vanished. We fell 15 feet, tumbling down a steep, dirt-choked slope until we slammed into the floor of an old tunnel. The air down there was cold and smelled of ozone and ancient dust. Marcus's flashlight revealed that we weren't in a standard mine. The walls were covered in hundreds of carved symbols, drawings that predated the Navajo, predated the miners, predated everything. This was where Leonard City had found the forbidden knowledge. This wasn't a mine. It was a temple to something that should have stayed buried. Above us, I could hear the scraping of long, bone-white fingers against the rock, coming down after us. We had no radio signal and no backup. I pulled out the protection bundle Hasty Nez had given me. The turquoise stone was humming, vibrating against my palm like a heartbeat. It was pulling me, acting like a compass for the soul. I looked at Marcus and told him we had to move. I didn't know where the tunnel led, but I knew that if we stayed in the light of that one flashlight, we were just bait in a trap. Behind us, the scraping sounds grew louder, echoing off the damp rock walls until the noise seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. After 10 minutes of stumbling through that suffocating darkness, we burst into a larger chamber. Marcus swept the flashlight beam around, and the shadows danced over walls that were absolutely covered in those ancient, jagged symbols. In the very center sat a stone platform, cold and ancient. Resting on it were 3 pieces of jewelry: a turquoise necklace, a white shell bracelet, and a piece of jet. I knew immediately what they were. "Leonard's offerings," I whispered. "The ones he promised but never gave. This is the heart of the machine, Marcus. This is where it all ends." Marcus didn't hesitate. He took a position at the tunnel entrance, his silhouette framed against the dark. He checked his weapon with a grim finality. "I'll slow them down," he said. "You figure out how to kill that light and close the door. Someone has to watch your back, Daniel. That's what partners do." Then the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Curtis emerged first, his body now a twisted, shuddering thing that was barely human. Behind him, the pale watcher stepped into the chamber. In this confined space, it looked even more massive, its bone-white head nearly touching the ceiling. "End of the line," it said, that melodic voice vibrating in my very marrow. "The ceremony completes here, with or without your cooperation." I looked at the platform and then at the walls, my mind racing through every late-night lesson with Hastin Nez. I realized the fatal mistake Leonard and Curtis had made. They thought the ceremony required 3 deaths. They thought the entity wanted blood. But the ancient way, the true way, required 3 acts of sacrifice. It required the choice to give up something precious for the sake of others. Thomas hadn't had a choice. He was taken. But I was standing there, and I was choosing. I picked up the turquoise necklace and pressed it to my chest. I began the prayer Hastin Nez had taught me. The real one, the one that Leonard had twisted. It wasn't a prayer of summoning, it was a prayer of boundaries. The pale watcher let out a shriek that sounded like grinding metal. "No!" it screamed. "That's not how it works." "You're right," I shouted back, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I had. "Leonard did it wrong. He tried to control you, to use you as a weapon, but this place wasn't built for control. It was built for acknowledgement. It was built to tell things like you where you belong and where you don't." I picked up the shell bracelet, and as the Navajo words left my lips, the symbols on the walls began to pulse with a faint blue light. "The first offering is acknowledgement," I cried out. "I acknowledge that you exist. I acknowledge your power." The watcher slammed against an invisible wall 10 feet away, unable to cross into the center of the chamber. Curtis snarled and tried to lunge, but Marcus's service weapon barked, the muzzle flashes illuminating the cave in strobe-like bursts, forcing the creature back into the shadows of the tunnel. I reached for the final piece, the jet jewelry. The air in the chamber began to hum, a low-frequency vibration that made my teeth ache. "The second offering is respect," I continued, the ancient power of my At-City blood flowing through me like a river of fire. "I respect your place in the dark, but I also respect the boundaries between our worlds, and those boundaries are closed. And the third offering is choice. The choice to protect my people, the choice to close the door properly, the choice to end this nightmare once and for all." I didn't hesitate. I bit my thumb hard enough to draw blood and let 3 heavy drops fall onto each piece of jewelry on that stone platform. At-City blood, freely given, not stolen, not taken by force. The effect was like a physical blow. The ancient symbols on the walls blazed with a light so white it felt like a scream. The pale watcher let out a howl, but it wasn't rage anymore. It was the sound of something being torn out of our world and pulled back into the void, its form dissolved, stretched thin like smoke in a gale. "No!" it shrieked. "The debt is not paid. 3 deaths were promised." "I corrected you," I shouted over the roar of the light. "Thomas sacrificed his life unknowingly. I sacrificed my blood willingly. And Leonard sacrificed his soul the moment he started this. The debt is paid. The door is closed. You are banished." The light intensified until the world went white. When I opened my eyes, the chamber was silent. The watcher was gone. Curtis Gorman lay on the ground, his eyes clear and human again, gasping for air. He looked up at me and whispered, "Daniel, what happened? I remember Leonard, and then the dark." It took us 2 hours to crawl out of those tunnels, Marcus supporting Curtis, while I let the warmth of the turquoise necklace lead us back to the surface. When we finally emerged, the dawn was breaking over the desert, painting the mesas in gold and orange. Hasti Nez was there waiting for us. He looked at me and said simply, "You chose well, Daniel Sosi. You understood what your brother didn't have time to learn, that old powers respect choice and sacrifice, not force." Life began to settle after that, but out here, normal is a relative term. I stayed with the tribal police. The protocols made sense to me now. They weren't just superstitions, they were the accumulated wisdom of a people who knew exactly where the sidewalk ends and the shadows begin. I was promoted to a senior officer, a liaison for unusual cases. Basically, when the call doesn't fit the manual, it goes to me. I spend my nights training with Hasti Nez, learning the rituals that protect our people. But then came a Tuesday in February that tested everything. A 7-year-old girl named Jessica Bay went missing near Chinley Creek. The temperature was dropping fast. We found her tracks in the snow, but next to them was a second set of prints, large, with odd spacing, walking on hands and feet. Something was hurting her. I broke Rule 1 that night. I didn't wait for backup. I followed those tracks into a box canyon and found her huddled against a rock wall, terrified. Between between us stood a creature that looked like a man, but moved like a puppet on strings. It was whistling, that high, melodic, sickening sound from Rule 6. When it turned, it used my brother's voice. "You're too late, Daniel," it crooned. "The child is ours." "The door's closed," I said, my voice steady even as my heart hammered. "What are you?" "A cousin," it laughed. "Your ceremony banished one, but we are many. We have always been in the spaces between." It took a step toward the girl, but I stepped into its path. I pulled out a small leather pouch given to me by Hastin Nez, filled with ashes from the ancient mine chamber. I let the ash fall into my palm. "I carry the authority of the boundary," I told it, "and I say you don't belong here." The creature stopped, its reflective eyes fixed on the ash. It hissed, calling my bluff, telling me I didn't have the power. I've seen men freeze when their training fails them, but as a detective, I've learned that the badge doesn't give you power. It just gives you a seat at the table. The real power comes from the conviction in your gut. Maybe I was bluffing in that frozen canyon. I'd only been a student of the old ways for 3 months, but I remembered Hastin Nez's voice. Power doesn't come from age. It comes from choice and sacrifice. I began to chant. It wasn't one of the complex hour-long ceremonies that require years to master. It was a simple prayer of protection, the kind a Navajo mother whispers over her sleeping child, the kind my grandmother surely whispered over Thomas and me when we were boys. As I spoke the words, I stepped forward, pouring the ancient ash from the mine in a steady, unbroken line between that creature and little Jessica. I felt something building then, not a power coming from me, but through me. It was the weight of generations of my people who had survived this desert, who had drawn these lines in the sand for 1,000 years. The creature hissed, its body recoiling from the ash like it was white-hot iron. "That won't hold," it screeched, its voice a jagged mimicry of human speech. "I am older than your prayers." "Maybe," I said, my voice dropping an octave, filled with the authority of the land itself. "But you aren't older than the earth. And the earth remembers the boundaries. It remembers when things like you stayed in the dark and left our children alone." I added corn pollen to the line, and the glow from the symbols on my medicine bundle intensified. The creature was pinned against the canyon wall now, smoke actually rising from its pale skin where it brushed the barrier. I scooped Jessica up. She was a dead weight of terror in my arms, and I backed out of that canyon, never stopping the chant, never breaking eye contact with those reflective, oily eyes. The creature didn't follow. It just faded into the shadows, a parting promise of "we are many," lingering in the air like a bad smell. Back at the staging area, the girl was reunited with her parents, and the relief in that camp was enough to light up the desert. But Marcus saw the look on my face. He knew this wasn't just a successful search and rescue. I went straight to Hastin Nez. He told me that by stepping between worlds to save that girl, I had marked myself. I wasn't just another cop anymore. I was a gatekeeper. And in the hidden places of the world, word spreads fast. Every skinwalker, every entity, every shadow that shouldn't be was going to know about the Navajo cop who closed the door on the Pale Watcher. My life became a blur of the mundane and the impossible. During the day, I'd handle a drunken disorderly or a fender bender. But by night, the special circumstances calls started coming in. Objects moving in empty houses. Livestock mutilated in ways that defied biology. People who went missing for 3 days and came back with their clothes on backward and their memories wiped clean. Marcus and I became the weird detail. He handled the reports and the forensics. I handled the ceremonies and the negotiations with things that don't have fingerprints. By late spring, the tribal council made it official. They created a new position for me, Cultural Liaison Officer. It was a fancy way of saying I was the bridge between the law of man and the law of the land. It came with a raise, sure, but it also came with a target on my back. Marcus grinned at me as we walked out of the station. Plus, he said, it means I don't have to spend an hour explaining to dispatch why we're sprinkling corn pollen at a crime scene. I'll just put consulted liaison in the report and call it a day. That night, I drove back out to the cemetery. It had become a habit by now, visiting Thomas once a week just to update him on the world. I understand now why you came back, I told his headstone, the red dust of the desert settling on the granite. I know why you left the comforts of Phoenix for a job that paid less and scared you to death. This is home. These are our people. And out here, sometimes protecting them means staring down things that defy every law we were ever taught. The wind picked up, carrying that familiar scent of sage and ancient earth across the graves. Just for a second, I could have sworn I heard his voice on the breeze, clear, calm, and finally at peace. You figured it out faster than I did, Daniel. I'm proud of you, brother. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was the grief finally lifting. But on the reservation, you learn quickly that the veil between the living and the dead is a lot thinner than the rest of the world wants to believe. Out here, anything is possible. As I drove back toward Red Mesa, I thought about those 6 protocols hanging on the station wall. When I first saw them, I thought they were a joke, superstitions from a bygone era. Now, I see them for what they really are. Survival instructions written in blood. They are the accumulated wisdom of officers who faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. I'd learned to follow those rules to the letter, but I'd also learned the heavy cost of bending them when a child's life was on the line. The badge on my chest represents the authority of the law, the modern world, and the promise of justice. But the medicine bundle in my pocket? That represents a power much older, a connection to the land and the ancestors who walked these mesas long before the first badge was ever forged. I'd finally learned how to carry both without breaking. Ahead of me, the lonely lights of Red Mesa began to flicker in the vast, velvet darkness. It's a place where the ancient and the modern exist side by side in a delicate, dangerous dance. It's a place where the coyotes howl at the moon, and sometimes something else howls back. I'm Officer Daniel Sosi, Navajo Nation Police, cultural liaison and a student of the old ways. I am the brother of a man who died finding the truth, and I am exactly where I need to be. I'm Detective James, and that was the story of the man who closed the door. If this journey into the heart of the Navajo Nation touched you, or if you've ever felt like something was watching you from the shadows of a lonely road, leave a comment and tell me your story. We're building a community here for the tales that don't make the evening news. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because out here in the desert, the sun is going down, and there are still so many stories waiting in the dark.